All right. I was going to do this at a different location in a different set of circumstances, but by the look of this crowd and the way we're set up, that's not going to be possible, so I want to do it now. We have just experienced the emotion of celebrating the lives of our diggers who volunteered to do things that we have not had to do. I ask you to look up the hill behind you, and there you will see a grey stone building with a big bronze dome. Underneath that dome lies the remains of an unknown soldier. And in the two corridors ahead of that dome, alongside the pond of remembrance, are the brass plaques of 100,000 Australians who gave their lives so that we wouldn't have to rally, who gave their lives so we could live in freedom, who gave their lives so we could say, nah. Everybody say, nah. And we, every 25th of April, we watch parliamentary dignitaries and other self-appointed hierarchy stand in honour of our diggers. And they say, as a great many Australians say, who at this moment are probably watching The Block, they always say, I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning to do the dawn service so I could say lest we forget. But I'm here to tell all of you, you forgot. Yeah. And we have not forgotten. No! We do forget some things. We forget the beauty and the power and the passion of the Spirit that floods through our veins. We forget how amazing we are as a nation. We forget how amazing our sovereign nations people are. Yeah. We forget everything they can teach us because we're too busy trying to dig ourselves in the bog we've got ourselves into. And we forget that in World War I, when the Germans were running over the top of everything that opposed them for 3 years, we forget that when the Spring Offensive occurred in 1918, they stormed the Allied lines and they forced them back to the sea, or that was the intent. And the British General Haig said, withdraw the troops from the front line. Bring the troops back to the coast and we shall defend the coast or go home to England. And General Monash says, what? Australian General Sir John Monash said, are you kidding me? Anyhow, he said, yeah, nah. And the word got to the front line at a town called Villers-Brettoneux, and the order was given. They want us to go to the coast. And a couple of privates looked at each other and they said, did we come all the way from Ballarat to do that? And they said, no. So as they started the retreat, they said, no way. We got the longest bayonets in the world. We're going back to take these mongrels on. And the general in command of American forces, General Pershing, was overly cautious. For 18 months his troops were there and he wouldn't put them into battle because he wanted them to be trained. He was scared to lose one of them. And on the other end of the scale you had General Haig, who treated them like used matchsticks. 60,000 dead in the trenches a day was nothing to General Haig, but to General Monash it was a shocking crime. And General Monash wanted to win with the least amount of casualties, and that's what he did. So when all the troops were withdrawing, there was a detachment of American soldiers amongst the Aussies at Villers-Brettoneux who were ordered to go back to their American base. And when they said, we're not leaving our Aussie brothers, they took off their American uniforms and they put on the diggers' uniforms. And outnumbered 40 to 1, they went back to Villers-Brettoneux and they pushed them back into Germany. We forget that spirit lives in us. We forget that spirit lives in you. And you demonstrate it by turning up. That's what they did, they turned up. And we forget that they were the first army to defeat and turn back the Germans in the First World War, and the Germans never won a battle after that. We forget that in World War II, the first army to defeat the Germans ever in North Africa or in Europe was the Australians and the Poms and the Kiwis, Canadians and Indians, and a large detachment of Aussies in that. They turned them at El Alamein, but it wasn't over them because they mounted a counter-offensive, and Rommel needed Tobruk. He needed it as a deep water port to get his supplies in. And the rats held it. They found an old Italian field gun with no wheels, and they mounted it on the back of a tray-top truck and wired it down with fencing wire. And they fired at the German tanks by steering the wheel and aiming the barrel that way. And when they fired, they said, "Quick, let's get out of here before they get us." So, the rats of Tobruk held Tobruk under Lieutenant Colonel Leslie Moorhead, who was also an Australian, who was the architect of the Great Withdrawal at Gallipoli. He was at Tobruk as the commander of the garrison, and that defeated Rommel, and that was the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. We forget that our Australian troops did that. And we forget that when the Japanese hordes were coming over to get us through New Guinea, apart from the Choco soldiers who walked the Kokoda Trail, there was a major battle before that, and it was the Battle of Milne Bay. And an undermanned garrison at Milne Bay, supported by Kitty Hawk fighters from the RAAF, that were flown by pilots who were so sick with dysentery, they cut holes in the bottom of the cockpits to wash the crap out every time they flew. Every time, but they kept going. They were weak, they had malaria. And when they didn't have enough fuel to keep going to attack the Japanese, they got in their Kitty Hawks and they got the soldiers on the base to push the tail around backwards and forwards so they could splay their machine guns into the jungle. And the Japanese turned back. We forget that we were the first army in the world to defeat the Japanese. And the Japanese went downhill from there. We forget the Battle of Long Tan. We forget the amazing feat of our soldiers in Long Tan. And when they came back, what did we do to them? We threw pig's blood on them. We forget the exploits of our soldiers, our special services soldiers and others, and our Navy and our airmen and women who have been to Iraq and the Middle East and Afghanistan to protect our freedoms. And for what? To come back and be ridiculed by a media that's so hung up on political correctness, it couldn't step out of its own way. And where are you now, mainstream media? Where are you? So we forget, but we must never forget. We must never forget. Any of you who have served in a uniform of any kind in service to your country or your community, if you have an item of clothing or insignia that represents that, whether you be a nurse, a paramedic, a police officer, of which there are many, firefighters, of which there are many, pilots and aircrew. If you're aircrew and you're looking down the barrel of losing your job in Australia like I did, put up your hand and yell out. If you're a nurse who's lost a job or his job, yell out and put up your hand. If you're a police officer who says, nah, put up your hand. If you're a serviceman currently serving or now retired or unemployed, put up your hand. If you're a doctor who's had the courage to look AHPRA in the eye and say, nah, or a nurse or a paramedic, put up your hands. You people and all the teachers and all the baristas and all the retail shop assistants, all the cab drivers, everybody who's gone through this fight. Put up your hands if you've lost your job because of mandates. Yell out. We want our jobs back. So, Ban segregation, you're not